Hi guys, I'm Meg. I'm one of the trainers on staff over at the Humane Society of Western Montana. Thank you for joining us for yet another behavior spotlight. And thank you if you voted in our Instagram poll to choose this topic. It won by a landslide for good reason. It's an extremely common behavior concern in dog owners, reactive behaviors. So, it's a hugely complex topic. I could not possibly hope to even scratch the surface within 30 minutes. But that being said, if your dog experiences reactivity, which I'll define in a moment, hopefully this live stream will help you learn to manage those behaviors and make living with your reactive dog just a little bit easier. So, reactivity is a dog overreacting to stimuli or a particular situation, an overreaction. So in most cases, that is growling, barking, lunging, whining. And it is normal, of course, for dogs to occasionally bark. They are animals after all. But if you find your dog is consistently overreacting in certain circumstances, they may be what we call a reactive dog. So it's very normal. It's the most common behavior concern that we see. And in fact, in the past month, 30 of our private training sessions alone within the month of February were based around reactivity and addressing reactivity with clients. So you are not alone. And I know it can be frustrating and loud at times, but there are certainly ways to help. There are different motivations for reactivity. Some dogs bark and lunge because they're nervous of a prospective stimuli like cars, bikes, people, dogs, or they're unfamiliar with that situation. But there's also a basis in frustration for some dogs. So for instance, dogs that just love other dogs and love people so much that they feel frustration when they cannot reach those things. So those are typically the two main underlying motivators for reactivity. And today, there's many kinds of reactivity, but today we're going to focus primarily on barrier reactivity. So dogs that react to stimuli on leash, at the fence line, at your window, or in the car, whenever there is some sort of barrier at play. Like I said, we're talking mostly today about managing behaviors, and the reason being is that management is so crucial. It is the most crucial component to training with a reactive dog. It's kind of like the insider secret. Everyone always wants those training exercises to work with their dog, but while the actual exercises may differ to help a reactive dog, dog to dog, management is across the board useful and absolutely necessary to see progress with your reactive dog. So to explain a little bit, if you are training with your dog or you're out on a walk and your dog is typically leash reactive, so barking, lunging, growling at other dogs, and let's say 4 out of 10 dogs, your dog ignores those dogs and behaves appropriately and calmly, you feed them a treat, that's amazing, and that is progress and respect. But if the other 6 dogs are eliciting a reaction, you're actively undoing your progress. So management is just so important to see progress. And that being said, even if you're not actively doing exercises with your dogs, management can help reduce their overall arousal so that when those situations do happen, your dog is more likely to succeed. So just to kind of break it down a little bit, we are going to focus primarily on leash reactivity, but I do want to talk about some options for other forms of reactivity. I should also note, because this is such a hot button, and complex topic, if you do have questions, feel free to drop those in the comment section. I imagine there will be quite a few, so if I don't get to your question, it's not that I didn't think it was important or relevant to reactivity. I will provide you contact information at the end so you can reach out to myself or the rest of the behavior team with any questions you might have. So I'm going to adjust my screen a little bit so I can see if and when there are some questions dropping in. All right, so for windows, It is very normal, even for social dogs, to bark and lunge at passersby outside of your window. If you live on a busy street, it's probably kind of a constant headache. And you can't always be there to call your dog away from the window. You have to go to work. You can't always prevent those reactive behaviors and be there and always be wearing your treat pouch. So putting up a visual barrier on the lower half of your window or on the entire window, depending on the size, can be extremely beneficial. Dogs are far less likely to react to triggers that they can't see. Some dogs are still sensitive to the noise of collars jingling or people talking or making a ruckus, but generally speaking, it will greatly limit your dog's reactions just to remove the sight. So I'm going to show you because I don't know if you can see it, so I may have to move my computer. I have a visual barrier on my front window. And this is just kind of a frosted decal. This is a huge bay front window. And even dog trainers don't want to constantly train their dog to ignore outside stimuli. So you don't have to buy a fancy decal. You can try things like contact paper. You could even just close the curtains, though I know in Montana, we want to get as much sunlight as physically possible. You can also try a cornstarch slurry, so cornstarch and water, and just paint it on the lower half of the window and see if it makes a difference for you. But anything that just removes that stimuli will reduce your dog from barking at those windows. Same thing for doors. If your dog can see out the front door because it's covered in windows and you get a lot of packages delivered, you can just put up that barrier and hopefully reduce some of that reaction when the postman or the UPS man comes. So the car, very similar, right? You can't close off your car windows because you need to see while you drive, but that doesn't mean you can't remove visuals for your dog while you're driving. So a few creative options for you. If your dog is comfortable in a crate and enjoys being in a crate, and you have a large enough vehicle to facilitate this, you can put their crate or a different crate in your vehicle when you're traveling places and just drape that crate with an old sheet or an old blanket, and thus you're totally removing all of those outside stimuli like dogs, people, cars. If your dog is reactive towards cars, that can really be challenging. So that's one option for you. You can also strategically give your dog food projects or enriching projects so that they're occupied and in a down position in the back seat or in your hatchback while you're driving, thus removing all of the traffic. So your dog, chances are pretty good, is not going to be cleaning out the inside of a Kong standing upright, right? They have to kind of lay down and use their paws, and thus they're staying low and outside of the sight of the windows. You could do this with bully sticks, pig's ears, you could do a frozen slow bowl. We love food enrichment over at the shelter. So the sky's the limit, but just something that occupies your dog and prevents them from reacting. They also make things like calming caps. I have not used those extensively, but a calming cap is just a kind of like a fly mask for a horse, if you've ever seen that. You know, you look like blinders, but it's not really. It just goes over the head and it reduces visual stimuli. Your dog can still see, they just can't see as well, and thus are less likely to be hypervigilant and looking at triggers in the car. And I'm just going to check. Okay, pretty extensive question. So I'm just going to wrap up this part and see if I can address that. In the yard and at the fence. Also very normal, right? Dogs are genetically predisposed in most cases to be kind of protective of their property. So my first and foremost recommendation is to manage yard time. I know our dogs love to be outside, they love to get smells, but if your dog is constantly barking and lunging at people or dogs that pass by that fence, it's not exactly very enriching or beneficial for them, and it's just stressing them out more. So whether that means letting them outside for a quick potty break and calling them back inside, you could take them out on leash so you have better control of the situation to get them out of there if they do react. I have seen some creative solutions where if people have a fenced yard and only one part of the yard shares the line with the sidewalk or the street, putting in a secondary barrier like an X-pen or just a second cheap fence like chicken wire to prevent the dog from being all the way up against the fence and less likely to elicit a reaction. So those are a couple good options to try, especially for yard reactivity. So I'm going to answer the first question that came, well, it's not really a question, but I'm happy to discuss it. So Samantha wrote, I have a very anxious dog that barks at everything that comes into our house. We're trying to distract with treats to put her in a dopamine state, but I don't want to reward her poor behavior. She is afraid of her own shadow, not to the point of aggression, but will bark at scary things. That really sounds challenging, Samantha. I'm sorry to hear that you're struggling with that. My first recommendation, it sounds like that she has a hard time with people coming into the home. So even dogs that are really excited, the door is still a barrier, right? And it can put them into that over-aroused state and cause them to bark and lunge. Though it sounds like for her, maybe it's more fear-based. I would recommend putting her in an alternative space, like a different room or a crate if she's comfortable, until those visitors come in and settle down so that you can more easily control that situation where she's introduced. If you think she comes out of that room with visitors and she's really just not going to enjoy it, she's still going to be scared and barking and lunging, it may just be best for that visitor to not interact with your dog and to just give her some food projects and give her some time to decompress. It's not necessarily beneficial for her, like I said, if she's really, really stressed in that situation. The good news, right, about providing your dog treats, we cannot reinforce or reward fear. It's absolutely impossible. So don't worry about rewarding her for poor behavior or for being afraid of something. We cannot perpetuate that behavior by offering her something good. So hopefully that answers your question, or at least provides you some management options to take her out of the equation. Okay, so I want to talk about leash reactivity a little bit. And leash reactivity, again, just like all reactivity, is very complex. We cannot control the world. We cannot control when someone suddenly pops out of their car or someone pulls up with their truck and lets, two loose dogs out. So I first and foremost want to give you some ways to help mitigate reactive behaviors when you're out walking your dog, because I want them to still be able to go on walks, right? Walks are important, they're enriching, a great way to bond with your dog. They get to smell and explore their environment, but we also don't want them to practice reactive behaviors. So my first recommendation is distance. The closer a dog is to something that they're excited about or afraid of, the more likely they are to react. Every dog's distance for comfort is very different. Some dogs need to be 150 feet away in order to kind of maintain their composure. And other dogs, maybe it's only those last 20 or 30 feet. And every dog is different. But that being said, the more distance you put between yourself and another dog or a person, the more likely it is that your dog is going to succeed. So that might mean if you're walking down the sidewalk and you see a dog coming, if your dog is really consistently reacting in that situation, which is the hardest kind, right? That head-on approach where that dog that maybe they're afraid of or super excited about is coming closer and closer and closer, it could just be best to cross the street or to turn around and go back down the block or turn down a different route that you maybe hadn't intended on taking, just to prevent that reaction. If your dog is reactive from across the street distances, I just recommend turning the other way. If you're in a situation that you just can't get out of, and it happens, you're flanked by two dogs, you know, there's one dog coming this way and one dog coming that way. Maybe there's a super busy street next to you that you can't cross. Your best option is to disrupt their line of sight and hide behind a barrier, which in a way kind of creates a visual distance. It doesn't mean that the dog isn't going to react, but it's definitely going to reduce the intensity of the reaction. So I guess what I mean by visual barriers, just to clarify, is things like bushes or parked cars or the corner of a building or a shed, anything that you can kind of find within that moment to disrupt their line of sight. And that can really, really be helpful. I'm going to talk about visual barriers just a little bit more in conjunction with a more technical exercise a little bit later. Another recommendation, if you have a dog that is frequently barking and lunging on leash, is to purchase a harness. The reason being is first of all, it's not great for their throat, right? If they're on a flat collar, to constantly be lunging into that pressure, you certainly don't want to do them tracheal damage, but health concerns aside, it's so much easier to control your dog on a front clip, I'll clarify, harness than on a flat collar. So I'm going to show you with my pup. So I can get it on. So this is one style of front clip harness. I know you can't see it at the moment. We sell a slightly different style at the shelter, but also is front clip. And sure, I could potentially get a harness that clips my dog over here in the back like this, but if my dog is barking and lunging at something, right, they can sled dog me closer and closer to that distraction. Whereas if I clip my dog to the front of the harness, they can't gain as much leverage to bark or lunge towards a dog or a person or a bicycle or what have you. So I'm going to kind of show you with my dog. Get it. Right? She just can't pull me as much as if she were clipped in the rear. So there are different kinds of harnesses out there, but I recommend a front clip. We sell one option. There are certainly different options for sale, probably at big box pet stores, but front clip is the easiest, to help control your dog. I want to talk also about ways to handle the leash. So I've had a reactive dog, and I understand sometimes it can just kind of feel like fishing. So before I knew what I know now, I really struggled, right, when my dog was having a reaction, because often we hold the leash like this at the very back here, which gives our dog 6 feet at least circumference to bark, lunge, and flail. We find ourselves really struggling to reconcile the situation and get our dog out of there. So defensive leash handling is great for really walking any dog that might pull towards something, but it's especially important for reactive dogs. It also helps you maintain better control of the dog and less likely, again, to have that fish on the line. So by defensive handling, typically what I recommend is if you have first of all, walking your dog on a 6-foot or an 8-foot fixed length leash. If your dog is reactive, I don't recommend a flexi lead. I have heard of dogs lunging so hard to the end of a flexi lead that it snapped, and then it snapped back and hit the person. So it can be dangerous. It's also just so much harder to control your reactive dog from 20 feet away than it is if you only have 6 feet. So 6-foot fixed length leash. I recommend putting the loop over your wrist and then putting the leash through your palm and either over the front of your hand. This leash isn't great for leash lock because it's pretty stiff, or over your thumb. So I'm just going to take it off my dog so I can show you better. So again, the loop is over my wrist, up through the middle of my hand, so between my thumb and my forefinger, And then I can either slope it over my thumb, which is a nice sturdy appendage if my dog were to lunge and pull, or you could fold it over the back of your hand and up through again. I don't recommend doing this because then if your dog pulls, this is going to tighten and you could really, really injure your hand. But just to have a little security, the loop over the wrist, up over the palm and over the thumb. My second recommendation for defensive leash handling is to have that second hand ready. So a leash lock is great, and I would say that's silver standard, but just having your second hand prepared when you're walking your reactive dog is gold standard. You don't have to walk your dog tight like this, because you could inadvertently encourage your dog to react. They might wonder, oh, my person is really, really tense. Should I be tense? Should I be worried? And before you know it, they're escalating into a reaction. But just loosely having the second hand ready so that if my dog does react, I can tighten that hand and have better control over the situation. It's better for your center of gravity too, to have both hands on the leash as opposed to back here, even with my leash lock, right? If my dog lunges towards a bicycle, she could rip me off my feet. So it just helps you stay centered as well. All right. Oh, so many questions. I knew you guys would have tons of great questions. I'm just going to give them a quick read over. So someone submitted a question. Hi Meg, my dog never had an issue in the car until recently. She's 6 years old and was very anxious when I first adopted her at 6 months, but I'm not sure what would cause her to suddenly go backwards and become more reactive. I do live in a remote area and she doesn't get to socialize with new dogs often, so maybe that has to do with it. So I think you're alluding to the fact that when your dog is in the car, she's more reactive in the car than she used to be. It's true, right, that if your dog isn't exposed to, over time, now that you live more remotely, to seeing dogs outside their window, it can be really jarring when they're reminded suddenly, oh, other dogs do exist, right? And that can certainly encourage reactive behaviors. I can't say definitively because I haven't seen your dog, but that being said, I would try the management techniques that I'm talking about, whether that is putting the crate with a drape over it, if you have a large or spacious vehicle, or providing her food projects when you're in the car, so that even if she does get a glimpse of another dog, at least she's having that really positive experience of enjoying her food. So especially food projects, right? They are self-reinforcing, meaning that if your dog is in a settled position and enjoying a Kong, they're learning that when I'm in the car, my job is to be settled and enjoy my food toy. So it can help create a sense of routine for her. It's difficult, of course, if you're doing a lot of car travel. I mean, you'd have to have a huge stock of bully sticks or pig's ears or stuffed Kongs in your freezer, but limiting car trips, I should have mentioned that earlier. If your dog is reactive in the car, so barking, lunging at dogs or people in the car, I don't recommend taking them on just for fun trips and having them sit in the car in the parking lot. Not that I'm saying that that's what you're doing, Andrea, but it just reminded me, we all love to take our dogs along with us, and we love to have them there when we go to the grocery store and come back out and they're greeting us. And we think it could potentially be enriching, which it can, right? They get to enjoy, maybe you crack the window, they get the smells. But if your dog is barking and lunging or really anxious about the presence of other dogs in the car, limiting those trips can just make it so much easier, so that those actual trips that you want, that you need her to take, like to the vet or to a hiking trail, she's enjoying them in a structured way, like with a food toy. So I hope that helps a little bit. so difficult without seeing all of your dogs. But if I don't answer your questions adequately, or there's more details you want me or one of our other trainers to know, I'm going to be providing that contact information at the end, so don't fret. So we talked about defensive leash handling and the importance of defensive leash handling. So now we're actually going to do an exercise because I've been blabbing a lot because, like I said, it's just such a complex topic and I can't address all forms of reactivity today, but hopefully these tips are at least helping you get started on the right track. So going back to leash reactive dogs. So we're defensively handling, which again is the loop over the wrist and then up through the palm and then looped over one way. I typically recommend over the thumb. We have our second hand ready. I want to talk to you about something called an emergency U-turn. So there are bound to be situations where a dog or a bicycle or a person appears out of nowhere, right? You can't always know when you round the corner if there's going to be a dog there. And if your dog is reacting or about to react, I want you to have an emergency getaway strategy. We don't want our dogs to stay in that situation and get more and more over-aroused and continue lunging and barking. And also, if they're only on the verge of a reaction, this can help prevent a full-blown reactive response. So an emergency U-turn is basically me sliding that second ready hand down closer to the clasp on my dog's harness or collar if you don't have a harness yet, pivoting my body away from the distraction. So kind of like if you had a child in a candy store and they were throwing just a full-blown meltdown, just a big tantrum. This is kind of a firm way to remove them from the situation, right? We take their hand and we guide them outside until they cool down. So I'm going to slide my second hand down. So I'm holding my dog's hand, so to speak. Let's say, for instance, that I'm going to change my body so you can kind of see. You ready? If my dog was about to react to something in that direction, I'm sliding the clasp down or sliding my hand down closer to the clasp on her harness, pivoting my body away, jogging maybe 15 to 20 feet, and then giving my dog a scattering of treats. The reason why I give that scattering of treats after I've moved my dog out of the situation is I want my dog to know that it's really fun to move away with me when these kinds of things happen. So we want the reward to be really good, not just one treat, but a whole little smattering of treats. So I'm going to show that again because it's a little complex. And again, if you have questions after this, that I don't address, please feel free to email us. I'm happy to send more detailed instructions for this kind of defensive leash handling and the U-turn. So I'm going to do it the opposite direction. My dog, let's say, is about to react. I'm going to slide my hand down towards the clasp, pivot my body away, jog maybe 15, 20, 30 feet, and give my dog a scattering of treats. All right. Drop her leash. So the U-turn is also important to practice outside of these emergency situations. And I recommend practicing them at least 2 times during your normal outing when nothing is happening. Otherwise, your dog may learn to think that this exercise or that kind of handling is linked to triggers, and then they'll start searching for distractions. So practice it a few times when nothing is happening. It helps you get comfortable with the motion. You can even practice by tossing a treat out of reach and then you turning away from it. So hopefully you find that helpful, again, as an emergency getaway strategy, as the fire extinguisher on that reactive response. All right, I'm just going to check and see. So Diana, good question. What about a dog that is just a pull or win on leash, not just around distractions? So a little bit different. but pulling is very normal. I really hope we get an opportunity to offer a live stream centered a little bit around loose leash walking. But Diana, if you're struggling to control your dog when they're out, I recommend this harness. It's the same thing. It can help mitigate the pulling a little bit, make it easier to control your dog. Of course, it's not a substitute for teaching your dog appropriate loose leash walking, but it can just make it easier in the short term. So again, another form of management, kind of like what I've been talking about here today. So a few end notes. I'm running a little long. Like I said, it's really hard to scratch the surface. When you're out with your reactive dog, carry treats. Really, really important. We definitely want to reward them when they make the right choice, when they choose to perform appropriate behaviors in the presence of something that maybe gets them really, really excited or makes them nervous. If you have a reactive dog, I recommend carrying high value treats, not just Zooks or kibble or biscuits, human grade treats. So this is teeny tiny pea-sized pieces. Some of these are a little bit bigger, of cheddar cheese. I've got some hot dog here. You could do boiled chicken, especially if you're concerned about digestive upset. You could do sauteed lean ground beef. The sky's the limit, assuming that your dog enjoys it and finds it motivating. But you need a reward that outweighs all of those distractions in the environment to make training easier. If your dog doesn't have endless food motivation like my lab, like she would just eat till she explodes, I recommend reserving your dog's meals for either after the walk or for other enriching activities. So let's say you're going to take your dog on a 7 a.m. walk and they suffer from leash reactivity and you just want to make it easier on yourself and on your dog. I would postpone feeding them their breakfast ration, use a few treats out on your walk, and then when you get back, feed them. So that can help increase your dog's motivation to engage with you, to train with you, and to perform appropriate behaviors. That being said, if you take your dog out after they eat breakfast, right, they've just eaten a cup and a half of kibble, and you pull out the hot dog's great, but it might not be as valuable because your dog is pretty satiated. So I recommend reserving meals for after your training if you can help it. Or you could even bring some kibble along if your dog is just having a harder time with those closer distances, but generally speaking, high value treats when you're out and about. If your dog really, really struggles with arousal, reactivity, fear, and you just feel like it's totally unworkable. So extreme reactivity at great distances, maybe they're very hypervigilant, they're constantly scanning the environment, maybe they have difficulty settling at home, or you just feel like they're always scared or always stressed. It may be a conversation to have with your veterinarian about the possibility of behavior medication. Behavior medication, there's a lot of different options on the market. Many of them are very affordable and they can make a very real difference for dogs struggling with severe reactivity or fear. So that can definitely help many dogs. We use behavior medication in our shelter with some more of our reactive or over-aroused dogs. So I know from personal experience, it can definitely make a huge, huge difference. We see it in our behavior clients as well. Well, I hope this was beneficial for you. It's like I said, it's just scratching the surface. I couldn't possibly hope to encompass all forms of reactivity in one 30-minute live stream, but hopefully this provides you some options and ways to help mitigate that reactivity in the long run, to reduce your dog's stress, to reduce your stress when you're out walking your dog or when you're driving your dog in your car or when they're in your yard. I want to bring up our end card here. So, questions that I didn't answer, or if you were watching this and you didn't ask a question that you might have, email us, behavior@myhswm.org. We have trainers on staff available to answer any questions, either reactivity based or otherwise, any training or behavior concern. We will be continuing these behavior spotlights for the foreseeable future at 6 p.m. on Wednesday. Tiff and her puppy Paya are doing puppy class on Thursdays at 6 p.m. I believe tomorrow they're talking about how to play with your puppy, which you might think, oh, duh, of course puppies want to play, but I know Tiff is going to have an amazing spin on it. If you've missed a previous behavior spotlight session, some of them are available on our YouTube via that URL, or they're also currently available in their full form on our Facebook page underneath the video section. So I hope, again, that this was helpful. I know what it's like to have a reactive dog. I know it's stressful and it's frustrating, but hopefully these provided you some tips to make you feel more confident taking your reactive dog into the world. Thanks so much, you guys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Weather's supposed to be beautiful here in Missoula, so hopefully you're able to take your pups out and about and have a good one.